Stay tuned for some advice and guidance around birth to 5 early years foundation stage from Nancy Stewart of Early Education. I'm sure this one's going to be really interesting.
Hello everyone, my name is Nancy Stewart and I am the project lead for a very exciting initiative currently underway in the early years, and I'm here today to let you know about it, encourage you to look out for developments, and even more important, to become part of it. The project is called Birth to 5 Matters. It involves creating new EYFS guidance by the sector for the sector. So what is the early years sector? Who are we talking about? Well, we're talking about all professionals who are working directly with children and their families in all sorts of settings, in all sorts of situations, from birth through the end of the EYFS. And also those who are involved in training people to become professionals and supporting them in their work, such as consultants and advisors. When you think of an early years professional, an early years sector member, they could have any one of these roles. He or she could be a working practitioner, as a childminder, a manager, a teacher, a student still learning, and yes, again, those support roles. So whatever angle we're coming from, we find the early years sector in all sorts of settings: preschool, schools, nursery schools, homes, colleges, local authorities. And we also need to bear in mind the early years sector is very, very broad in terms of whether we're new, whether we have been finding out about early years as a possible career, whether we're an apprentice, a newly trained person, or possibly someone nearly as old as I am who has been involved in this field for many years. The level of qualification is also very different. Someone might be working as an apprentice, someone else might have a PhD in child development and detailed knowledge of early learning within particular areas. So a huge span. But when we're talking about guidance, we really want to reach and draw from those people who are working directly with children, who are going to put into practice all that is best for children and families. Well, that practitioner has a lot going on. Whoever he or she is, they are juggling so many aspects of knowledge. They need to have in-depth understanding of a huge range of ideas and practicalities. We sometimes take for granted the level of expertise that we hold. And I think this is an opportunity to stop and take stock of how much we know what works, what doesn't work, and also to stop and take stock of what we'd like to know more about, what we would rather understand a little bit more or a little bit differently. Well, there is all this knowledge and expertise amongst the early years sector that we want to draw from. Each of those practitioners and people who support practice are drawing every day, often in a very unconscious way, on our own professional pedagogy. So what is that? It's the core of how we work, how we make those moment-to-moment decisions about what we're going to do with the child in front of us that we're playing with or having a conversation with. So what is pedagogy? Well, I believe it starts very strongly and really should hang on our values. What do we want for children? What do we think is important to support in their lives? That is going to be individual to each of us, but also as a community of professionals, we sometimes come to a consensus about what are the most important things. So we hold that in our mind. And for me, it comes down to, why am I doing this job anyway? What makes this what I think it is one of the most important jobs in the world? Well, it's because what I want for children, and what role can I play in that? So then we move from our values down to our professional knowledge. We know about child development. We know about things like communication and language and how it develops, or literacy and how it develops, or a sense of quantity and number and how that develops. And we know about play, types of play, what it brings, what it offers for children. So we have knowledge and we have techniques and strategies that we learn. How do we learn that? Well, we study, we have our initial training, we go on learning, don't we? But we also learn from the children. Every day we watch children and we think about what we see there and learn from our experience. So we have a lot of knowledge and understanding, and that then leads into our practice. What are we actually going to do every day? So that's the core of our pedagogy. And around that sits this constant cycle of gaining knowledge, reflecting, deciding what we might want to change, thinking we've changed something in our practice. Has it made a difference? Is that something I want to keep? So constantly developing as professionals. It's a huge and important and very, very complex role and job that we do day in, day out. So here we are as professionals, and then along comes a framework, the EYFS, for instance. What is the relation of the EYFS to us as professionals? I don't see it sitting at the top. It's not dictating our values or our knowledge and understanding or our practice, really, but it is an aspect there that we relate to. I like to think of it as a reciprocal relationship on our practice, that the EYFS may bring us some new knowledge and understanding. It may have an impact, possibly even on our values, if it gives us some new things to think about there, about what really matters. And it can have an impact on our practice. But you see, that arrow runs two ways, because I think it's also really important that we don't see it as this is exactly what we must do, but this is something that we are going to respond to and interpret in our own way, in line with our values, what we already know and understand, and what we find works in practice. So we need to respond to and interact with the EYFS. So what is Birth to 5 Matters? It will be, because it isn't complete yet, we're in the process of developing it, it will be guidance, which is designed to support the practice in the EYFS, not affecting our basic values necessarily, hopefully adding to our knowledge and understanding so that we can then feed that into our practice. It is very much building on strong foundations of the existing EYFS and the existing guidance that people have found very useful in many ways. But all that we've been working with can be usefully updated and improved. We also want to ensure that what we develop has strong evidence to support it, that we are not making changes according to anyone's personal preference or willy-nilly. We're going to say why. How do we know that what we want to change is better? We also want to ensure that it will meet the needs of practitioners. And that is one reason we need to involve as many practitioners as we can to say, what is it that you need and how can we ensure that that need is met? So who's producing Birth to 5 Matters, this new guidance? It's being developed by the Early Years Coalition. The coalition is a group that has come together from all these organizations and have pooled resources and expertise and sense of direction to design and then deliver this project. It's very much collaborative. There's nobody in charge who makes the decision. Things are decided in a very open and collaborative way. So just to draw some of these out for you so you can see who the Early Years Coalition is. It is initiated by and chaired by Early Education, which is one of the leading charities for early years in the UK. We then have involved some of the biggest organizations representing tens of thousands of settings and practitioners across the private and voluntary sector and schools, with the Early Years Alliance, National Day Nurses Association, National Education Union. Also involved are organizations who represent practitioners who base their work in very deep principles of pedagogy, which are some of the roots that we have all learned from and continue to learn from in the early years. So Froebel, Montessori, and Steiner. We have involved some of the organizations representing those who train practitioners, foundation degrees and early childhood studies degrees, teaching, etc., and also researchers, so that we have that very strong base of evidence in what we're looking at. We have a couple of organizations who represent other organizations nationally, Early Childhood Forum, and internationally, OMEP UK, which is the UK branch of an international early years group. We have Keeping Early Years Unique and the LGBTQIA early years group, representing particular interests among practitioners. So very, very broad group. And we have a lot to build on. We're not starting from scratch. So let's have a little history lesson about where the EYFS comes from and where our guidance comes from. We had initially, well, not initially, but many years ago, 3 different documents. We had the curriculum guidance for the foundation stage, which related to 3 to 5-year-olds. We had then Birth to 3 matters, looking at the youngest children. And we also had separate education and care, so that we had daycare standards. It was decided to bring all those together to form the one framework which combines learning and development and welfare and the whole age range, birth to the end of the reception year. So the EYFS was born. That process was deeply collaborative over many, many months, many, many meetings, many, many consultations, where practitioners were able to say, this is what I want, this is what's important to me. And it was built in a collaborative way. What emerged was the EYFS from 2008, built very much on agreed principles. So you could say these are some agreed values at the top of our pedagogy. We believe that children are unique, all individuals, and have such a capacity to learn, and we need to respect individual cultures and backgrounds and ways of being, ways of learning. The importance of relationships with families, and crucially, the attachment relationship and the quality of interaction with children. Enabling environments. We think that's an important factor. The physical environment and the opportunities and experiences that we provide for children. And then the learning and development, how learning and development happens and what it is that children are learning. And very much a play-based approach, which is actually written into the statutory guidance, statutory framework, into the law. So we had the EYFS, and it was a rich resource, a bit of statutory part, and lots of non-statutory guidance. We had the cards, we had a CD with lots of background information and practice guidance. Well, then in 2012, 4 or 5 years later, it was decided it's a good idea to take stock, review it. Could we make it better? Well, yes, I think we could. So the Tickell review was held to review it, and it was renewed in 2012. The new statutory framework. The main changes were heightened attention to the characteristics of effective learning, and also identifying the difference in prime areas and specific areas. Those prime areas that are fundamental to development, and bringing heightened attention to the birth to 3 and how incredibly fundamental they are there, but continue in importance all the way through. And the specific areas which have a different function of sharing with children our cultural tools and what we know is important for them in life today. After it was redone, then the government said, well, okay, we will commission a rewritten development matters. So that was undertaken to align with these changes in the EYFS. And at that point, we came up with this way of linking our principles. Starts with the child, with what the child brings, who the child is, and their learning powers. And then the adult jobs, the positive relationships, the enabling environments. And what results is the learning. A few years later, 2019, the DFE decided to reform the EYFS. Again, have another look. Maybe it's time to update. So the EYFS coalition of those many organizations came together to say, well, let's contribute to this process. And they commissioned a literature review of the research, a survey of practitioners and parents, and put together some examples of best practice. The evidence review came up with some important pointers. First of all, it said we don't need a big change. It's actually working well and is very much valued, but let's have more emphasis on the characteristics of effective teaching and learning, more emphasis on PSED, and that we should concentrate on oral language and communication before we move on to talking about that reading and writing side of it. We need to speak and understand what people say to us and what we want to talk about before we can put it on paper. They also said there's strong evidence for a balanced teaching approach using play and the way we interact with children in play alongside more structured learning and teaching. So the statutory framework, which is not yet the law, but will be coming into force in September 2021, is out now, and we can have a look at it and see what changes have been made. This is the opportunity for us now to say, okay, there it sits on the side of our pedagogy. How do we interpret it? How do we read it and think about what we want to do in practice? So that's the role of Birth to 5 Matters, to flesh out the skeleton of the statutory framework, to say how we can support it. We do want to meet the needs of practitioners, and we know that from our first survey that views on development matters as it exists currently were overwhelmingly positive. It was seen as appropriate, giving support for helping children's learning, and it supports planning, supports new and less experienced practitioners to understand child development and progression, and also that it explains how children learn and why early development happens. But, big one, strong criticism of the way it has been widely used as a tick list. And that is very unfortunate. The development matters all the way through on every page had this statement: children develop at their own rates, etc. Development statements and the order they're in are not necessary steps for individual children. They should not be used as checklists. But we know it has happened. And that is a issue that the DFE is trying to address, and it must be addressed. But I think it's more than just a change in the document. It is a culture change, which I hope we will see. People also said there were other things we could improve, including more emphasis and information about the characteristics of effective learning. And we could improve those descriptors in the areas of learning, update them, improve them. Questions about the age stage bands. That is another big area that we need to look at. And information was wanted about play, outdoor learning, working with parents, children with English as additional language, special needs, transition into Key Stage 1. So we had that to start with, to think about what are we going to do to meet the needs of practitioners. Beatrice Merrick, who is the chair of the Early Years Coalition, has said we will be working with the sector. We're going to build on what we've got and develop an evidence-informed document for our times, reflecting key concerns raised by the pandemic and longer-standing debates about how to create strong foundations for children from birth to 5, and very much about doing what's best for children. So to do that, we want to harness the expertise of the early years sector and inviting you all to become involved. We're seeking very wide input from online survey, member events, consultation. As the drafts are published online, we will be asking you, what do you think? What could be better? We also have set up and running 18 specialist working parties, including both practitioners from all types of settings and researchers who are currently drafting sections, identifying evidence and further information and resources that we can use for people who want to dig deeper. We will have set up reference groups of early years experts, practitioners and parents to review the guidance as it develops. We have already had our first survey, and I want to share with you some of our findings. They will point the way to how we shape the document. We had the survey online, and we had over 1,600 responses. As you can see, the great majority were the people we want to reach, really working with children, teacher or practitioners, managers, head teachers, deputy head teachers, and childminders. Where do we work? Again, 75% working on the ground with children, and a good spread of nurseries, preschools, primary schools, nursery schools. The rest were people working in colleges, and the big red one is other. And actually, when I look at those, a lot of those are actually working in academies or independent schools. So lots of direct involvement and knowing what they need in practice. We asked them what purposes should the guidance serve. 98% said, yes, we want to keep those principles and link it to what adults should be doing and how children show their learning through the characteristics. 95% said, yes, illustrate typical, quote, child development, but keep in mind, every child is unique, not expected to match any pre-planned trajectory. 93% said they want to use it in an observation, assessment, and planning cycle to meet individual children's needs. 88% said they wanted to use it to assess progress in best fit bands, not checklists. What topics would you like it to cover? I find it interesting here that the main two, the highest, were play and the characteristics of effective learning. And quite a few other areas, very important, specific and prime areas of learning, developmental delay, parent partnership. Should it be organized under the principles? Yes. Should we keep separate strands within each area of learning and development? So this means rather than have all of communication and language jumbled together, shall we keep attention to listening and attention, understanding, and then talk, so that practitioners can see where children might need support clearly? 79% said yes. And then would you use further links for your own CPD? Yes, they would. And a lot of information about how they would use that to support staff, to work with parents, and to talk to senior leaders or Ofsted. Now, That was a lot of agreement, wasn't it? But here it changes. Should the current age stage bands be retained? Just under half said yes. 40% said no. 15% say, I don't know, because it is a very difficult question. Of those who said no, we asked them what would they suggest. Well, again, it's quite split. The largest section goes to give us some bands, but don't put ages on them. The next largest, let's have it just continuous progression without bands. So that looks pretty big, but when you actually map it, it's part of that 40%. So you can see there, 45% want us to leave it alone. About a quarter want bands without ages. Some want no bands at all. And then the others, wider bands, narrow bands, don't overlap. So we're going to have to think carefully about how we keep the best aspects, but recognize there is probably room for some development there. So what's it going to be? It's going to be a core guidance document based on previous guidance and the current development matters, but expanded, updated, improved. It will be downloadable as a free PDF. We will also have a website where there will be an interactive version, and you can arrange it in different ways so that you could look all the way across a certain sort of level of development, or you could look within an area of learning. And there'll be lots of links to further information, to deeper descriptions, resources, and evidence. Here's the timeline. Very fast, and we're working very hard on it. The first draft we will publish for consultation in December. And we will hope that people go online, have a look, and complete a survey about their response. We'll then take that in, rework it, and we'll put the second draft online in February. Again, bring it back, see what you think, and rework it again. And the launch will be at the end of March. So I hope you will join us in this progress of this and be ready to let us gain from your knowledge, your perspectives, and make sure it's something that will meet your needs. Thank you.